Hi everyone, my name's Matthew Cote. I'm a computer engineering student in the College of Engineering, and I'm going to be talking about my project titled mECG. It's a continuous and wearable heart monitoring system. This was part of my senior design project for the College of Engineering, so I actually worked with a group of people, and we made this design for our client, Sebastian Murak, who is a faculty member of the ECG department. So first off, why do we need this heart monitoring system? So cardiovascular disease, also called CVD, is an umbrella term for a multitude of different cardiac illnesses, including coronary artery disease and atrial fibrillation. These multitude of different diseases contribute to over 630,000 deaths per year just in the United States. This is making it the leading cause of death. It also costs about $200 billion a year, according to the CDC. And so it's pretty clear this is a major issue, and we need more and also improved ways of monitoring people's health consistently. So this is where the electrocardiogram comes in. This device has been around for a while now, and it essentially measures the different voltages of the pulses that go across your heart, which cause the heart to beat. It generates this characteristic waveform here, where each different little blip in that waveform corresponds to a different part of your heart working in some manner. And so doctors essentially take this measurement over a period of time, and they analyze this waveform to see if there's any differences or any issues that can be indicated by here. And this is helping with diagnosis of the various issues I mentioned. And so typically when someone needs to have an ECG done, they go into the hospital and they have a full 12-lead ECG done with these electrodes attached all over your body. You're there for upwards of a half an hour, say, and you take this measurement and your doctor analyzes it. There's a lot of issues with this current method, though, the main one being cost and accessibility. With the rising costs of healthcare, this may not be realistic that someone could take time off of work, go into the hospital, and have all of this work done for them. Also, this is only done for a limited period of time. Some illnesses may not show themselves in a 10-minute scan, and their symptoms are a little bit more sporadic. So you need a longer monitoring period in order to catch all of these different symptoms. And so this is kind of where the wearable industry comes into play. These fitness trackers have been growing more and more popular for a while now. Many people know about the Fitbit or the Apple Watch. One industry in particular is wearable ECGs themselves. So I have two different pictures here. On the left, you have the Apple Watch, where somebody would put their finger up against the watch, hold it for 30 seconds, and that would take the ECG. The one on the right is called CardioCore. It's less popular in the United States, but essentially it gets strapped to your chest, and it continuously monitors your heart and the activities over the period of the whole day. And again, it displays it on your smartphone to then view statistics about it. And so you might think, wow, this solves all of our issues. Well, when we did our market research at the beginning of last semester, we realized there's a couple common issues with a lot of these products right now. The main one is expense and complexity. Both of those systems I mentioned go for at least $400 a piece. Which can be prohibited for a large portion of the population, especially in the United States. Also, they're increasingly complex. So the Apple Watch, you can send text messages, you can view videos, and a lot of unrelated things to the electrocardiogram. Additionally, I have here a piece of market advertising, and you can see for the CardioCore, it measures your respiratory rate, your skin temperature, calorie tracking, a lot of these things that you may not necessarily need if you just want to monitor your health, your heart health. I can think of family relatives who would struggle to use this complex of a system, and I'm sure many people can as well. So this can be a barrier for people accessing these systems. And finally, some of them aren't continuous. So for the Apple Watch, you have to manually trigger this measurement, and then it will actually do some processing and monitoring of your heart. So this is where our project comes in. We were tasked with designing and building an open source ECG wearable. that essentially addresses all the issues that I just mentioned. Open source essentially means that all of our intellectual property, all of our code, and hardware diagrams are all made open to the public so that people later on after we finish can then kind of iterate on this design and make it even better. So for a glimpse into what our system entails, this is the main overview. You start with the signal detection, which is kind of the hardware component of it. This signal is then sent via Bluetooth to your smartphone where you can view the waveform. And then finally, once we're done using the data on the app, it is then sent for storage in the cloud. So I'll dive in a little bit into each individual section. So for the sensor system, you can see on the far left that the user will stick 3 electrodes, 2 on the upper chest and 1 on the abdomen. And these will actually acquire the signal of the ECG, and it will then send it to some circuitry, which will filter out the signal and essentially remove all of the noise that takes away from what we really want to see. And on the far right, that's actually the analog result that came from our system, actually, and you can kind of see the characteristic waveform in that shape in those measurements. The next step is we use a microcontroller, which is basically just a really small computer on a small chip. And it takes discrete samples of the analog signal, which is the top left. And if it does it at a frequent enough sampling rate, it can then essentially recreate the signal in a digital form so that it can be stored on a computer. And once we have that digital signal, it's then sent to the smartphone via Bluetooth. And then finally, once it's on the smartphone, we actually display and do some basic processing of the signal. So up here, you can actually see that's a screenshot of the application. It's very simple. That was one of the things we wanted, was to make it easy to use. So not only is this the only functionality of taking and displaying an ECG, but the user interaction, the user interface is simple where anybody can use this. And you can see you have the actual waveform as well as some basic processing to calculate the beats per minute from that signal. And then finally, once we're done processing, the data is then sent to the cloud and it's stored securely. There's a lot of stories these days about data breaches and the need for security. So that was a really big emphasis to make sure we're encrypting everything and making sure it's not able to be attacked by any sort of outside hacker, for example. And so right here, this is the first version of our prototype. It's put in a 3D printed enclosure made of plastic, and you can see it has the microcontroller and the battery in there as well. And so this does the sensing, and it charges the whole system. And it's pretty big right now, but the way we've designed the components, it can be scaled down to much smaller. So for some project results, with this prototype, we've demonstrated we have end-to-end communication. It costs less than $100, so this hopefully meets the expense requirements. And it also supports near continuous monitoring. And like I mentioned, the electronics themselves have a small footprint, so they could be scaled down to an even smaller form factor for future designs. And finally, we've extensively documented everything so that a future group could take this design and improve it in many different ways. And so finally, why is this important? Really, we've solved a lot of the engineering challenges that a lot of systems right now are plagued with. And we've created this foundational system that can then be iterated on and improved so that hopefully over time, these types of devices will meet all of the requirements of being inexpensive and accessible, for example, and that many more people can have better access to heart monitoring technology. Thank you. Yeah.
Matt, fantastic product. So just a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've thought through this. I know it's a prototype. So the sensors go in your body.
Yes.
And how are those powered?
How's it what?
How are those powered, those sensors?
So the whole system is powered by a lithium-ion battery, which provides power for both the circuitry and for the microcontroller, which then does all the data processing, basically.
So is it can be wired from the device as it stands now? Or what was your, like, is it, like, for example, you talked about those sensors on your body, right?
Right. So the electrodes are then attached via wires to the casing and all of that circuitry that I mentioned earlier. Yep.
What was the reason for choosing Android as your test smartphone brand versus another brand such as Apple?
So part of it was just feasibility. So most of the team had actually Androids, and it's a lot harder to develop for an iPhone and in that whole ecosystem if you don't have access to it, which was the case for pretty much all of us. Also, Android's known to be a little bit more open and easier to work with, so we were hoping it would kind of push people to take advantage of that openness to innovate a little bit more and not be as restricted by some of the restrictions that Apple puts in place for some of their development.
Are you thinking about any alert system?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Are you thinking about some alert systems?
So in theory, the next step would be to actually do a lot more in-depth processing. You could do a lot of different things where you try and detect, say, AFib in the signal. That's what the Apple Watch does. Given our time constraints, that wasn't super realistic, but that would definitely probably be the next iteration of things. All right. Thank you.